The small-scale skirmish game for Warhammer 40k, known as Kill Team, has had a number of incarnations over the years, and this is its most recent edition. Now, this is the first release of Kill Team since 8th edition launched last year, and in this video I'm going to be opening the box up, taking a look at the content, focusing mainly on the new stuff such as the rules and the new scenery that we get inside. But before we proceed, and for true transparency, I just want to say that Games Workshop have sent me this box set in order to do some content on this channel. So with that out of the way, let's get started and open this box up and take a look at those rules. The first thing you look at when you open this box up is the Getting Started rules. Now this is a double-sided piece of paper which has everything you need to know to get started playing the game really quickly. It's designed to be used with 2 Skitarii and 2 Genestealer Cult miniatures, so you only need to assemble 4 miniatures, and it basically just goes through the various phases and also introduces you to some of the concepts and core mechanics of the game. Next up, we have the core rulebook. Now this is a paperback, and that's a little bit disappointing really, because I would have expected this to be a hardback, similar to what we got inside of the Warhammer 40k and also the Age of Sigmar starter sets. But it's still quite a hefty looking tome, which features everything you need to get started playing Kill Team. The first few sections of the book cover a little bit of background about the 40k universe, the purpose of kill teams, and the kind of areas that they operate, before moving on to showing you some basic core concepts of tabletop gaming. Now this core rulebook doesn't assume any prior knowledge, which means you don't need to have the 40k rulebook to play it. Everything is self-contained in this rulebook. As long as you've got this, you can play Kill Team. Saying that, if you're already a player of Warhammer 40k, you'll have no trouble grasping the core concepts of Kill Team. They're very much based on the core set of rules. In fact, when we actually look at the stat lines later on, you pretty much see that they are identical to their 40k equivalents. First of all, the turn order. Now in 40k, you tend to have one person going, having their turn, doing their movement, their shooting, their psychic phases, and their close combat, before play moves to the next person, who completes all those phases using their units. In Kill Team, it works a little bit differently. First of all, there are no units. Each individual miniature is treated as its own operator. It completes its own movement, it completes its own shooting, and everything is completely independent of each other. And the order in which these miniatures are used and activated is also different than you would expect from playing 40k. This means that you can react to your opponent's moves almost instantly. You don't have to wait until their turn is completed before you can retaliate. This adds an extra level of tactical depth to Kill Team that you don't necessarily see in 40k. Whilst the turn ordering is different in Kill Team, the phases happen in pretty much the same order. You first of all have your initiative phase, where you roll off to see who has initiative for that turn. Then you move on to movement, psychic, shooting, combat, and finally the morale phase. For the most part, these phases remain unchanged from their 40k counterparts. For example, the movement phase, you can do regular movements, you can fall back, you can advance, and you can also charge, but there is an additional option that you can do as well. This is called readying and allows you to pick a miniature and elect them to remain stationary during the movement phase. If you do this and they're not within 1 inch of an enemy miniature, you can actually disregard the turn order when you come to the shooting phase. Anyone who is readied can go first, even ahead of the player who has the initiative. This is great for units which have heavy weaponry or even long-range sniper rifles, if you want to make sure that they have a good shot at the enemy team first. This turn alteration within a phase also affects the charge movement as well. If you charge an enemy unit, then it means that your miniature will get to fight first when it gets to the fight phase, so long as other charges haven't happened either. Again, this is why turn ordering is very important in Kill Team. You need to be aware of how enemies can react to your movements, and also plan ahead to make sure you can cut off other enemy units from fighting, firing, or even moving by using your own units correctly. Now the next biggest change in Kill Team from the 40k rule set is when your miniatures lose their last wound. Instead of being removed from play immediately, they first of all have a check made against them to see whether or not the wound was simply a flesh wound that can be shrugged off and the fighter can continue on. If a miniature loses its last wound, a dice is rolled. On the score of a 1, 2 or 3, that miniature has received a flesh wound, and this is marked on their data card. That miniature is returned to play, but there are a few disadvantages to having flesh wounds. However, if that dice roll bears a 4, 5 or 6, then that miniature is removed from play as normal. So what are the disadvantages of having flesh wounds? Well, first of all, if you receive 3 flesh wounds, that miniature is removed from play. Secondly, every time you have a flesh wound, you add a modifier to that dice roll that we mentioned earlier. Basically, it's a +1 for each flesh wound that you have. So the more flesh wounds you have, the less likely your miniature is able to shrug off any later wounds. However, this is where terrain comes into play. In addition to receiving the -1 modifier for actually hitting an opponent in cover, the opponent also receives a -1 modifier when rolling to see if they've scored a flesh wound or not. So the more flesh wounds your miniature has, the more likely you are to want to keep it in cover. But that's not all. For every flesh wound that you have, you receive a -1 modifier whenever you try to roll to hit, be it shooting or during the combat phase. This represents the miniature getting tired, getting parts damaged, and just not being able to fight as effectively as they could do at the beginning of the game. Which brings us to the morale phase. Now this is broken down into two distinct sections. The first of all involves seeing if your kill team is broken or not. To see if your kill team is broken or not, you first of all need to check to see if more than half of their number is either out of action, has a flesh wound, or shaken. If this is true, then you must roll 2d6. If the number is greater than the highest leadership in your kill team, then that unit is considered broken. Having a broken kill team is bad news, because they remain so for the rest of the game. In the morale phase, each miniature in your kill team will need to take a nerve test, which I'll discuss in a moment. In addition, a broken kill team also receives negative modifiers to both shooting and combat, much like having flesh wounds. So let's go back to those nerve tests that I mentioned earlier. Now these must be taken, like I said, if your kill team is broken, and each miniature in the kill team must take one. However, if your kill team isn't broken, only miniatures which have flesh wounds must take a nerve test. This involves them rolling a d6. If this value falls under their leadership, they have passed and no further effects are applied. If they fail, they are counted as shaken and cannot complete any more actions until the shaken token is removed at the end of the next morale phase. This is extremely bad news, as having a miniature with a flesh wound is bad enough, let alone having that miniature out in the open with no way of getting to cover, because that guy is probably going to get shot up and killed very quickly. Now you're probably thinking that that leadership test sounds extremely easy to pass, and for the most part you would be correct. However, there are some modifiers that you need to take into consideration. For every other miniature in your kill team that is either out of action or shaken, you must add a +1 to that test, which means that the more of your kill team which is affected by morale or even dead means that you're less likely to pass that test. However, if you're within 2 inches of a friendly miniature which is not shaken, you actually get a -1 to that dice roll, so that it's quite useful to keep some of your flesh wound miniatures close to other miniatures in your squad. Now that covers all of the core rules. Now there are some advanced rules which cover the use of terrain in your games, and this is pretty much the same as 40k. You have things like open ground, difficult terrain, impassable terrain, and dangerous terrain. It also covers things like jumping across buildings. It involves climbing up buildings, jumping down from buildings, and also crossing low obstacles. Then we come to kill zones. Now this is the different theatres of war that your kill team will be operating in, and these have special rules based on that area. Now for this box set, you get the Sector Imperialis, and you have some rules in this book for using those buildings in your game. And this is where I have a criticism about this book. Now I know for a fact there is at least one more kill zone being released for Kill Team, and that is the Sector Mechanicus, and that features all of that industrial looking terrain that we've already seen. Now a lot of people will have that terrain in their collections already and would like to use them, and also the special rules that come with them. However, to get those special rules, you need to buy an expansion box set, which comes with the terrain that you already have. I don't see why those rules haven't been included in this rulebook. It would have been nice to have everything in one location, and it also means that you can use those rules even if you have the terrain already. But these are optional rules, which means that you can use your regular Mechanicus terrain, you just don't get the advantages of having those extra tactics or special tables like we have here. Now the next section of the book focuses on the various battles and missions that you can play using Kill Team. It also introduces a new phase called the Scouting phase. Now this happens at the very beginning of the game and basically involves two players working against each other in secret, trying to get one up by scouting positions, laying traps, disarming traps, or taking forward positions. And you're allowed to choose one of these at the beginning of the game, and these are secret and revealed simultaneously, and just add an extra level of tactical depth to Kill Team. Now the missions themselves are quite numerous and are split down into different sections. We have open play missions, we have narrative play missions, and we also have matched play missions. Now these matched play missions are great because they not only have setup rules for 2 players, but also a larger setup rules for using 4 kill teams in your games as well. Next up we have the command points and tactics. Now these are very similar to the system that we have in Warhammer 40k. You generate a command point for each turn that you have a Battle Forge kill team. Now I will explain a little bit more about Battleforge in a moment. Now these tactics allow you to do additional effects, and some of them are generic, some of them are specific to your kill team, and others are specific to your specialist that you have in your kill team as well. Now, a kill team is battle forged when it meets a certain number of criteria. Now, this is basically going to be for match play rules. It's essentially a way of making sure that you have 2 kill teams which are evenly matched on the battlefield. Now, the restrictions for fielding a battle forged kill team involve things like having at least 3 miniatures, having a leader, having no more than 3 specialists, having a no more than the maximum number of miniatures detailed on their unit sheet, and also only having a maximum of 100 points for your kill team. For every whole 10 points that you don't use from that 100 point allotment, you get an additional command point at the beginning of the game. So let's talk a bit about specialists. Now these are the guys in your kill team which have a particular task or a particular ability that they are good about. Now this can range from being a sniper, a leader, combat specialist in close combat. These can be frenzied fighters which are known as zealots. They can have comm specializations, they can have demolition specializations, and we have lots of different tactics and also special abilities related to these specialisms. Now each of these specialisms and tactics are further broken down into levels. Now your specialists will gain levels as they play through campaigns, but if you're playing match plays, you'll simply stay at that level 1. Now there are loads of specialization abilities and also tactics available to you, so I won't cover them all here, but they are very nice for getting some individualism into your kill teams. Now the biggest section of the Kill Team core rulebook is the unit listings. Now there are unit listings for each of the main factions in Warhammer 40k. This includes Space Marines, Astra Militarum, Chaos Space Marines, Eldar, both Dark and Normal. We also have the Adeptus Mechanicus Scutari in there. We have Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, even Harlequins feature as well. So there's a whole bunch of different units that you can choose from. Because all of the rules are in this core rulebook, you don't need any additional codexes to field them. Each faction is broken down into the same subsections. Now the first section that we have for the faction here is its background. It explains what this kind of faction are about and how they fit into the world of Warhammer 40k. Next up we come to the RPG elements of Kill Team, where we have some tables that allow us to generate some particular background for our Kill Team. Now this is broken down into a background section, a mission section, squad quirk, and finally individual specialist demeanors. Now each of these involves 10 options and is generated either through choice or by rolling one of the d10s that you get in this box set. Now these RPG elements are great for giving some depth and background to your kill team, be it if you want to model these quirks and traits onto the miniatures directly, or if you just want something more interesting if you're generating a campaign. Next up we have the rules for the faction. First of all we have things like faction-wide special rules, such as the Canticles of the Omnissiah table for the Scutari, and then we have the faction-specific tactics. Next up we have the unit listings for your faction. Now these unit listings are very similar to the Warhammer 40k counterparts, and you'll find that the main units that you have access to are the general rank and file that you have for your faction in 40k. Now there are a few tweaks for this. For example, you have a maximum number listed of how many you can field in your kill team at any one time, and you also have some tweaks or additional special rules that you don't find in 40k. For example, the Adeptus Astartes faction has the special rule called Transhuman Physiology, which basically allows them to ignore the negative effects for hitting in close combat and at range of a single flesh wound. After the unit listings, we have all of the weapons available to that faction, along with their stat lines. Then we have the points cost for fielding both weapon and war gear, on top of the miniatures cost as well. And this format is repeated for each faction that we have in this book. And finally, tucked right at the back of the book, we have the rules for running a kill team campaign. Now this covers everything you need to know for running the campaign, what games to play, and also how you can evolve and improve your kill team throughout time. This involves your specialists gaining ranks and new units being added to your kill team. And so that pretty much completes the core rulebook. Now that we've looked at the rules, let's look at some of those additional items that we get in this box set. Next up, we have the tactic cards, which are nice handy little references for fielding tactics in your games. We have all of the generic ones and all of the specialist specific ones, as well as ones for the Skitarii and also the Gene Stealer cults as well. We then have the data cards for your kill team as well. Now these are just handy references that you can look at when you're playing your game. You can see the stat line of your miniature, what weapons they have, and also keep a track of how many flesh runes they've received as well. In the box set, we get some pre-made ones for each faction, as well as some blank ones as well if you want to generate your own kill team and equip them with your own weaponry. In the box set, we also get a couple of faction-focused booklets, one for the Devoted Sons Neophyte Hybrids kill team, and also one for the Skitarii kill team, Gamma Zool 881. Now inside of these booklets we have a short story which kind of deals with what these guys do in terms of their kill team, why they're fighting, and their aims in this campaign. And then we also have a little bit more information about the background of the faction, as well as some photography of the assembled miniatures in action. To help with your gameplay, this box set also comes with a range of tokens, specific for both the Skitarii and also the Gene Stealer factions. As you've already seen earlier on in this video, these tokens allow you to keep track of which units have moved, which units have advanced, which units have shot or are readied, and also whether or not they are shaken or not. These are just really handy little tokens that you can keep by when you're playing to make sure you keep track of everything that your kill team has done. And finally, we get a clear plastic ruler and 8 dice. 6 of these are D6s and are used for general gameplay, and the other 2 are D10s and are used for generating those faction-specific traits. And so that brings us to the miniatures that we get in this box set. We get enough components to assemble 10 Gene Stealer Cult Neophytes and 10 Adeptus Mechanicus Skitarii. As you can see, they come in coloured plastic, which is great because you only need to assemble them. You don't need to worry about painting them in order to have them distinguishable on the battlefield. Now I won't go into too much detail with these particular miniatures as they are already existing miniatures and have been around for a while already. So that brings us nicely to the final section of this video where we look at the terrain. Now this includes both the cardboard board and also the new plastic ruins. So let's take a look at the cardboard first of all. Now the gaming board starts off as 11 inches by 15 inches, which means it's a lot easier to store, and then it folds out into the 22 by 30 inch gaming area. Now the cardboard it's made out of is quite nice and thick and is also double-sided as well, which means you have a different Sector Imperialis gaming board on either side. And finally, this brings us to the Sector Imperialis scenery itself. Now this is all brand new scenery and is designed to replace that older Cities of Death scenery that's been out for quite a while now. You can see that this also comes in coloured plastic, which means that if you don't want to paint it up, it'll still look quite nice on your gaming table. The sprues that we get in this box set seem to be a mixture of the Ruin set and also the Administratum set as well, as we don't actually get the large statues or buttresses found in the other kits. In my opinion, these buildings are a vast improvement over what we've seen previously released for Warhammer 40k. Those old Cities of Death buildings just didn't fit together properly, they didn't seem to line up properly if you had a long wall of them, and they were very, very flimsy and likely to fall apart. Now Games Workshop seem to have learnt from their past mistakes and made these buildings a lot more chunkier, a lot more solid, and also increased the size of those contact points between the different panels. One of the things which I think allows this kit to be a lot sturdier and easier to build than the older sets are the columns. The way this works is each building is broken down into individual panels. These can be doors, these can be windows, these can be solid walls, but all of them will have a column attached. These columns act as contact points when you're affixing 2 panels together, and also offer support for the upper levels of your ruins. And that's not all, these columns also allow you to assemble your walls diagonally to each other. Now it's surprising that this isn't mentioned in the instruction booklet, as you can quite easily see that these walls fit into each of those grooves on the column sides. Now these buildings aren't just superior in their build quality than the previous ruins were, they also look a lot better in my opinion as well. The Gothic architecture, which is synonymous with Warhammer 40k, is very much present in these miniatures. It's kind of like a combination between an old cathedral and a newer building which has industrial looking fans and vents and also some electronic items as well. The fact that we have a mixture of ruined and non-ruined panels also means if you want to build a more solid structure for a tower or for a non-ruined building, for example, you can easily do this. But if you want to add those ruined ends of walls and other items too, it fits perfectly with those non-damaged sections. One thing that's also worth noting is the fact that this new scenery fits perfectly with the pipes that we already have from those industrial looking sets. You can attach the pipes directly to the vents and also the fans that we have on these new buildings. Now, my only gripes about these ruin kits revolve around some of the cutting that you need to do in order to use some of the pieces. Now, these are notably some of the panels with doors inside of them and also some of the floor supports. To have an open side door, you will have to do some cutting, and it can be tricky to get into those corners with a hobby knife or a hobby saw, and clippers would probably damage the door itself. Additionally, the floor supports require some cutting in order to have a floor placed above them. Again, this isn't a great deal of work to do, but it does mean that it slows down the assembly time and also requires you to flatten out that surface to get the best fit possible. So with everything in this core set looked at, let's get a conclusion for what I think about this box. So overall, this Kill Team box set is an excellent way to get started with the game. You get everything you need in there, you get some miniatures, and you most importantly get the rulebook and also some scenery as well. Now, as Kill Team is a very scenery heavy game, it makes sense that the core set includes that scenery. You only need a few miniatures, so the fact that you only get 20 in here doesn't matter, because that gives you two perfectly serviceable and customizable kill teams to assemble. The rules themselves are very easy to pick up, especially if you've already been playing Warhammer 40k. You won't need to really think about how the different mechanics work, and once you get your head around that alternating turn sequence, you should be golden. Now, like I said, there are a couple of oversights, especially in the lack of kill zone rules, and it would also have been nice to have a hardback rulebook as well, just to have that little bit more strength and rigidity in the cover. But the extra items that you get in here, such as those data cards and also the tactic cards, are all nice little extras. So if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know in the comments below, and also make sure you subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my latest videos. I'll no doubt be featuring some of these ruins and kill teams in future videos as well. So the only thing left to say is thanks for watching and goodbye.